Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see you up and about. Did you have a good time in Ecuador? Or rather, a cool time in Ecuador. Well, it's truly a tropical port, and Panama is similar. We're in the same neighborhood, but it has a little more of a sea breeze, just because it does join the two Atlantic and Pacific coasts within only 85 miles, and so. 50 miles, 85 kilometers. And today I'm just going to give you an overview of the Panama Canal, but I would recommend you come see Jay's talks, Jay Wolf, who has 3 talks about the intrigue and the detail of particularly the French effort and then the American effort and such. I'll show you more about what's currently going on in the current crisis of the canal, which is caused by the drought. But I first came to Panama when I was 19 years old, stayed with an old family friend who happened to be the commandant of the canal, and I was there when Panama was let's say, a rather poor country, except that it had this canal in the middle run by the American government, and it looked like a country club. And then as soon as you walked over the line, they called it, into the town, Panama City, Colon, they were either very poor or even dangerous. As one of the engineers said about the old Panama City in Colon, it's a good place for humans to vent the steam of their passion so they don't cause even more trouble when they're working on the canal. Well, those days are over 100 years ago. The canal has been built, it's been operating without stopping for over 100 years now, and it is one of the great linkages of the seas and avenues of commerce. And without the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal, the global economy would be constrained. Instead, it's been the foundation for transportation and logistics for over 100 years now. And as a professional sailor, I've gone through the canals many times and keep up with the news. Unless they have a problem, like in Suez, when that big box ship stuck in the canal a couple of years ago, Suez Canal, and then now the Panama Canal is lacking enough water to keep up its regular trade. But we'll get to that. I'll just show you the general area. If you know, Panama is this isthmus from South America, Colombia, up into Central America, and the canal actually runs almost due north to south. It's not an east-west navigation, actually, just because of the turn of the land. And then there's this Oreos Peninsula, lots of beautiful bays, Boca de Toro, beautiful places on the other shores. This is the wild Darien coast. This is the Caribbean coast. The San Blas Islands are up there. But this is very rugged, all the Darien, and then you have the Cordillera of the Central American volcanoes going up into Mexico, of course. And then you have the Gulf of Panama. We're down here coming up past the coast of Colombia for a whole day. This nation, which only was founded in 1903, has mixed agriculture, ranching, coffee, different things. So it's actually, since the beginning of this millennia, it has boomed economically and has much more going on than I remember when I was first here. But in this, in this sort of digital overview, we are off at sea. We come into Lake Gatun from Panama City, and then we come down the canal and out to the Caribbean. I'll show you the details of it. We will be coming to the Pacific entrance, which is, well, here it says a heliport. That actually used to be a Spanish Navy fort, then an American Navy fort, then a Panamanian Navy fort. Now it's a country club and a mall. See, isn't that evolution of history? But we will actually dock there overnight until we get our passage to come around and start going up into the Miraflores locks and up and across for a whole 12-hour passage to the Caribbean. But we'll be in the shadow of the great city of Panama, which has boomed, as I would call, sort of like concrete mushrooms, not just because of the value of the transit of the shipping in the canal, which subsidizes the Panamanian government and much of their business and social programs, has allowed many benefits to Panama, except that many of these things are built on speculation. So like some other capital cities with favorable investment conditions, you have a lot of construction of condominiums where actually nobody lives. They just trade them around. The Panamanians themselves have extensive suburban areas and other neighborhoods, but the Panama City is sort of a icon of prosperity on the Pacific side. Then as you go over the isthmus, this is the river that ran from near Panama City down all the way to the Caribbean, and it was considered the natural crossing from one side to the other, and that's where the canal has been built. It used to have native transport in canoes and packs and things. So for the indigenous people, they always knew there was another ocean. In fact, Panama was considered a major transit point for indigenous Americans for up to 10,000 years. They found evidence of trade between Peru, Ecuador, and Mexico that if they didn't go by boat, they must have packed mule, rather not a mule, but a human carried it up through Panama and Central America before all these nations existed. So the archaeology shows this was never a wilderness. It was actually settled, and then the people, they were always involved in sort of transfer or transit because of where they are. So these are some of the Embera people who are still here. And when the Europeans first came, they found that, oh, these scattered communities around in Panama were quite different. Now, this is an area that called the San Blas Islands. Over 350 of them are now an autonomous region called Agunayala. They're also known as the Kuna people. And they live on boats and on islands. They don't live on shore. So they have a whole mini autonomous region of Panama where they have actually, through their own advocacy and some fighting, have gained sort of autonomous status in the Caribbean side of Panama. And you'll see them actually in Panama City and Colon because they are famous for their weavings and, their embroidery, and they bring them ashore, they come in, and then they sell them. They call them mola, and you'll see this if you go into Panama City or Colon anywhere, and you'll also see the people. They come over to sell it themselves and are very friendly. They do speak Spanish, but they are still fairly ethnically separate from the rest of the Panamanians. So here's some in the market in Panama City. So they're distinctive, let's say. And then in the uplands of Panama, especially in the Darien to the south, there's the Embera and a few other groups that are living in the mountain streams and in this very dense rainforest jungle. And there's an excursion off the ship up to the local Embera village, which is above Lake Gatun, where you can go visit the village and see the people. And they live on stilt houses and fairly, let's say, well air-conditioned because they don't have walls or hard roofs. But they'll bring you up with the help of that Yamaha god and go up and you can visit their village. And so these are the sort of people that the Spanish first met, and they were, as usual, very friendly and welcoming until other things happened and the Spanish demanded gold. And it was a Juan Batista who came in 1501. He was an officer in Columbus's second voyage, and one of the stowaways on that trip was this fellow, Vasco Núñez de Balboa, who got together with local guides, and they said, yeah, we'll take you over to the other side and show you the other ocean. So that's the first time any European had seen the Pacific Ocean, and he called it a Mar Pacifico just because it was calm, but he also called it the Mar del Sur, I mean the Southern Ocean. So we occasionally still hear that in English, or the Southern Seas. That was thanks to Balboa. He went back to his commander on the other side, and he was accused of treason and beheaded for his discovery. But anyway, that was the conquistadors had it rough either way sometimes. But then for centuries, there was a path train going on the old native trails over the hills on the banks of the Chagres River over to the Pacific. And parts of it have been preserved because this was the only way to cross over for so long, and much of it has been, of course, changed due to construction, but there's still remnant bits of it. The French came and set up a port in Chagres. Well, this is the mouth of the Chagres River. Now the town is called Colon. It was taken by the Spanish finally, who built forts there to protect their settlements because once they had found the Pacific, and Pizarro left from Panama City to go down and invade Peru and ransack it, all of the gold and jewels that came up from South America, Pacific side, came up through Panama, were put on mule trains, and they came over to the ports of San Lorenzo or Colon and Portobello, so that they could be transferred to Spain. The Scottish imagine having a new colony called New Caledonia in 1698, and this was a prospect of colonization. Of course, the problem was you move from Scotland to Panama, you're probably overdressed. And so they had initial landing, and they had a stock issue, and they had supply ships, but actually everybody got ill and died. And this is the great problem of the tropical area. The Europeans usually could not survive the malaria, yellow fever, other bites and pestilences that are there. So that, again, is just a ruin and a plan that never worked. Then the pirates came from around and about the great Welshman Henry Morgan, who lives on in his own bottles of rum, came from Jamaica with a large privateering fleet and then invaded Panama. He attacked Portobello, the main fort on the Caribbean side, and then he marched with an army of thousands, including cattle that he used to stampede at the Spanish, and he came to the old town settlement of Panama, which then was a small, maybe 10,000 people at most. It was mainly a port for transferring all the gold goods. And Henry Morgan sacked the town, and when he finally went away, the Spanish authorities decided to leave the old town in ruin. And again, you can go to an excursion to old Panama Viejo, where they remember the pirates who came and destroyed it. And it's south of the main city now. But from all this time, there was always a plan, well, maybe we should have a passageway. It was even proposed by Charles V of Spain in 1501 that there must be we could just dig a trench across it, not knowing the topography. This was a plan of the Royal Navy, 1831. They sent surveyors to see how you could get from Colón up here again down to Panama. And it was always thought, well, you just have to dig through the Chagres River and you would probably get there, except that there's 350 meter high, over 1,000 foot high mountains ridge in the middle of this whole narrow piece of land. So many attempts were made to survey it and find a better way, and that's one of many plans came through. There was a Spanish government tried to build it in 1814. There was a treaty between the U.S. and Colombia in 1846 to build a canal, but again, this was all imagining, not knowing what the engineering could possibly do. But in 1847, they laid a railroad track. It was financed through a stock offering, and in short order was subscribed, and it opened in 1855. And this meant that you could get on a train in Colón and in about 4 to 5 hours suddenly be in Panama City. So this suddenly was a great convenience, and they offered tickets at $25 each, and that was considered such a high price, but it was immediately sold out because it was the time of the gold rush in California. So rather than going all the way around South America, there was a stampede of people who then came to Panama to take the train. And again, the train became the essential technology that came in and essentially enabled the canal building also. So in 1881, that's a later date of how the railroad, picture how the railroads were built in to take out all the dirt, of which there was a great deal. This is the extension of the Panama Railroad that goes out to where we'll dock at Fuente Amador. So they built the whole causeway and they out to this fortress where we will be all of night after tomorrow. And the Panama Canal still continues going through rather rugged territory. Now it has mostly freight traffic, but you can also get a passenger train to go through the jungle and such. It is now operated by the Kansas Railroad system, so it's still privately operated and financed, but again, essential to the whole region. So we're, of course, right here where there's only this narrow gap, but there's always been a thought of building another canal up in Nicaragua just because there's no great mountains in the way. There's the Lake Nicaragua, which is placid, and they thought they could just have a sea canal on either side that would be at sea level and make it much more convenient. But it was never built. It was studied quite a bit, especially in American circles, just because all the business and transport and the railroads and the expansion to the west coast of North America meant that there had to be a better way to get bulk goods through, especially after the California gold rush. It was always studied that, well, we have to build a canal somewhere. And the Nicaragua portion was preferred. As I said, it would be all sea level, it would be a bit longer. But you can see in Lake Nicaragua, there are volcanoes right there that are active. And so when it came up to Congress to vote whether Panama or Nicaragua, the Panamanian delegation or advocates passed out Nicaraguan stamps which featured a volcano over the construction site. So Congress, in its occasional wisdom, decided they'd put the canal in Panama because the geology of Nicaragua was still unstable. It's still been studied, including the Nicaraguan government signed up with a Chinese consortium to build it a few years ago, but then it fell apart. And again, it has a lot of other problems. Most oceanographers say if you connect the two Caribbean, or rather the Atlantic and the Pacific, there's a tidal difference, so there'll be a constant water flow washing out any construction once it's opened. So that's one minor engineering problem. Well, it came to this man, the great French engineer and diplomat, Ferdinand de Lesseps, who had been the driving force behind the Suez Canal, to then take up the project and had a bond release and raised money from the French people and investors. And so he personally led this effort to do what he'd done in Egypt with the Suez Canal. He would then do the same in Panama. And at the time, he misestimated the amount of fill that would have to be taken out. Even with the most advanced dredgers and mechanical steam engines of the time, it was estimated it would take him hundreds of years to be able to manage the volume that would have to be moved. And so this was watched very closely at the time because there was a lot of money behind it. There was a lot of engineers went down there, but again, the problem was the actual terrain, the geology, but above all, the pestilence of the diseases. And so the French died by the thousands. And Jay Wolf will give you a little more detail about that kind of critical period when this was an issue internationally. If the French built the canal, they would then run the canal and have that as their primary colonial interest instead of the American interests, which were to make sure it was an American project. So Teddy Roosevelt, president, stepped in, and he then consorted and discussed it with this man, Philippe Benau Varela, who was a French aristocrat, financier, who was the main advocate that Panama should be just made its independent country. The American government could buy out the French operation, which was finally agreed at $40 million, and then they would bring in much more capital and modern equipment to try to finish it. And so this is the intrigue of the canals, that the nation was created because of this project. And here's a cartoon of the time of Benau Varela and Teddy Roosevelt making a independent country, Panama, out of Colombia. And this was in the news as the man behind the egg. That was what they called it. And the Declaration of Panamanian Independence was declared in 1903. And there's a trivia question: where was the agreement signed and made official? In New York, at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, with nobody from Panama or Colombia present, and not a word of Spanish. But nonetheless, there was interest in Panama City, especially the Amador family, after which the fort is named, been there since colonial times. The first lady of the first president of Panama designed the flag so it would not be in Spanish colors. It's in red, white, and blue as let's say, a tip of deference to Uncle Sam. So at the time, this was the height of imperialism. This was, again, a satirical view of what the deal was really about. And, of course, it was initiated, funded. It was through Congress as a public work, not private investment. And so they had let's say, a deeper budget than a mere corporation had it at the time. And so Teddy Roosevelt famously said, "Let the dirt fly, and we will never be defeated." And so the effort started in 1905. And in 1906, Teddy Roosevelt himself came down to Panama to see the project. First time a sitting president had left the country, but you notice he's on these tremendous big steam engine, new scale construction equipment, and he was wearing this distinctive hat, which somebody gave it to him. It's that hat we saw made in Ecuador, which then he thought was so convenient because it was cool and light. You could roll it up, put it in your pocket. It didn't bend out of shape. So they ordered tens of thousands of them to give away as gifts and to the staff, let's say. And so that became the Panama hat, even though it's still made in Ecuador. Meanwhile, the effort to build was quite fantastic. Just the excavation amounts alone, the French did about a quarter of it, and then the rest of it was done under the American effort until 1914. But it said that the volume of the excavation would be like building the Great Wall of China from San Francisco to the East Coast, or a canal 10 feet deep and 50 foot wide from across the breadth of the continent, or 63 pyramids like in Egypt, but almost a mile high, and one New York City block that would be 19 miles high. So it's a lot of dirt. It's hard to express how much had to go, but the staff that went there were the pick of the engineering. Army Corps of Engineers led the whole project, by the way, and then they brought in their Victorian lifestyle in this steamy jungle, and all the engineers, administrators, and the technicians. About 100,000 laborers were hired. There weren't enough, of course, in Panama because there was hardly anyone there at the time. So they mostly got West Indians from Barbados, Jamaica, for $1 a day. And they say about over almost 6,000 died in the project, about 500 per mile, including 350 Americans. If not by accident, it was usually because of yellow fever and or malaria. And at the time, people would come and they would just get ill, and they didn't know why. And so this was the great specter over the project. And even though this was the best paying job many a person might ever get at the time, they heard that it was a death pit and they didn't want to go. And so this became the great challenge of curing particularly yellow fever. And it was done finally by a Cuban doctor, and like Gargas and Dr. Ronald Ross isolated the bacteria that was in the mosquitoes, and then they finally just did a extensive extermination campaign for all the mosquitoes. It was estimated they cost $10 for every mosquito they estimated they killed, but it saved the project because they could assure the safety of the workers. Well, it was still hard work, and they had to move all this dirt. This is a case where the railroad tracks had to get moved all the time, and they have a special machine to pick it up and move it over. But in all the mud and all the debris, it was a tremendous amount of effort. Here's some of the laborers carrying the dynamite to blow through the mountain at Culebra Strait, which is the midpoint before you go into the Pacific or Atlantic, where the biggest mountain and the geology was the most difficult. They used some 65 million pounds of dynamite and daily blasting and then hauling and digging it out. And it took actually 30 years to dig this trench to the state that it is today, and there's still regular dredging of it. So this is the Culebra Cut, it's called, or the Galliard Pass now, after one of the engineers. But this is the amount of it. They thought they would not have to do it so deep, but the problem is that the hillsides are all such loose, sedimentary, mixed, unstable soil that it all just kept falling in, including in this landslide in 1908, killed quite a few workers, cucaracha, which means cockroach in anger. But then they had to take it all out and start all over again, and then finally they were able to get it stable enough so this doesn't happen anymore. We'll go through there in a couple of days. You'll see it's 3 times as wide as this, so that whole mountain has been taken down on either side. And then the locks started being constructed and built. Most of them were brought in by ship from the U.S., particularly a company in Pittsburgh built the great locks, which are up to, they're 40 feet to 80 feet big, and they weigh 7 tons or more each. There were a couple of different sets of them, but they're buoyant in that they have closed pockets, so they are very light when they are submerged in water, and they're still working. And the other key element to the the whole project was the hydrology, because the design of the engineer John Sullivan said the only way we can do this is if we have a reservoir and a lake that will then connect the lock systems on the Atlantic and the Pacific side. But that meant that they had to develop abilities to bring water from the mountains, build reservoirs, dams, and so the whole canal is really a great hydraulic machine that is used to fill up the Great Gatun Lake, which is 85 feet above sea level. And so all the water in all the locks comes from a series of reservoirs. They dammed up the Chagres River, and then to flood the locks in 1913, when it was all ready to do, President Woodrow Wilson sent a telegraph signal to the command there, and they blew up the coffer dam that then filled up the canal, and then it was ready to finish and use. In the canal headquarters building, they have this mural of sort of the drama of the construction at the time, which was unparalleled anywhere in the world in its scale. And then in 1914, the first ships came through, first a French crane and then an American ship, the Ancona. And then in 1920, after World War I, it was open to all nations. And by international maritime treaties, it's an international strait, so any nation of any ship, including military, can schedule passage through. So even in the height of the Cold War, Russian submarines would go through the canal with notice. And the tolls depended on the weight and the value of the cargo. Usually it was 98 cents a ton back in when it opened in 1914, but the least heavy toll of anybody going through was this famous swimmer, Richard Halliburton, who swam for 3 days through the canal, and he was charged 36 cents. While I'm talking about tolls nowadays, a ship like this pays at least $100,000 to $200,000. That averages out about $500 per person, whatever they assess the value of our transit. Because of the current water restrictions, now the top toll recently this last year was $3.9 million for a liquid natural gas tanker. So it's more expensive than it used to be, especially if you don't swim. But here's another critical reason for the canal was military, so that the Navy could get from one ocean to the other. So this is one of the early battleships that came through. World War II, there was a Coast Guard cutter fleet because German U-boats were sinking ships on either side of the canal, and they had, let's say, their hunting grounds here. And so there was a lot of fortification and the air cover for the canal so it would not be put out of action. And the Navy ships were made just to fit the canal. So here's the big Missouri, the big Mo coming through. And that's the canal we'll be going through, actually. So this is a submarine. Again, this is open to all people if they can get a schedule. They've restricted it so much now. I'll let you know about that later. But here's the Culebra Cut. And that's where they took back and terraced all this rough rock. And it sort of looks like a Peruvian temple to me, though. Could be. Maybe that's what it is. And then there was trouble in Panama, though, that old phrase, because the operation was mostly operated by Americans and with local labor. But again, the Panamanians felt like they were a colony, and some were influenced by the various political troubles around the region, particularly in Cuba, Nicaragua. All countries around were having either economic or political troubles. And in Panama City at the Balboa High School, the high school students went out and took down, burned the American flag, and put up a Panamanian flag, at which point the police came and arrested them, and it was let's say, an impetus to come to some agreement that Panama would feel like it owned and operated the canal in their own country. And this was promoted by the General Omar Trujillos, who then negotiated with the American government so that in 1977, President Carter and Trujillo agreed that Panama would assume operational ownership and control of the canal. And this has been debated in American politics quite a bit ever before and since, because it was say, why did we pay for it, we built it, we operated, why are we giving it away? Well, first of all, it didn't earn any money. We were subsidizing the canal through taxpayer support of it. And also there were such bad relations with many other countries. The decision was to give it over to the Panamanians so that we would not have more political trouble, also endow them with the responsibility, relieve us particularly of the security of it. Later troubles in the world, including now, if the canal was an American military base, it would be, might be a target and or might have more trouble. And then when it was transferred to the Panamanians, they had a period of, let's say, responsibility training to the point where they now run it without a problem these days, at least administratively. But anyway, Panama continued to have some troubles. That treaty had an exception. If there was a security threat to the canal, the United States still had the authority to come in and make some order, which is what happened in 1988 when Manuel Noriega, a soldier in the Panamanian army, had a coup d'etat throughout Trujillo, wanted to throw out all the agreements, and then he was accused also of working with the Colombian cartels and drug dealing. So, however, the details, in 1989, the U.S. military came in and then assumed security on the canal and then went to the presidential palace and tried to arrest Noriega. They didn't attack, and there was hardly any injuries in this maneuver, if you call it that. But they caught Noriega and hounded him with the ultimate weapon. He refused to come out, and they didn't want to go in and get him, so they bombed him with heavy metal music until he couldn't stand it anymore. You know how that feels. Anyway, he was taken to justice in Miami, and he's been in federal prison since. There are some Panamanians who still think he was the good guy in this, but meanwhile, the canal has gone on, and it has gone through a major upgrade, and it has kept up with times, let's say, and tried to make what is the original canal, as you can see through here, through the Lake Gatun. Again, we'll be coming Miraflores, the bridges, and then on the lake, and then out at the Gatun Lakes past Colon. They realized that this was made for ships of a certain area. Now the shipping industry has gotten so much bigger that they plan to make an expansion, which I'll show you in a minute. But anyway, the canal itself is the series of 3 locks in the Miraflores, Pedro Miguel lock, 2 locks, 3 in the Gatun locks. So you go up across the lake and down. It's actually fairly simple except for the engineering. But it's so essential to the global economy because that makes direct routes for most of these other continents to go that, and that way. So the value of it in the shipping and in the global economy is almost incalculable, except it's calculated every day. The canal makes it possible so that the East Coast and West Coast, both in whatever kind of Canada down to even South American shipping goes through the Panama Canal, and it saves so much time for transport. So when we come into Panama City, you'll see this. There are hundreds of major ships out waiting to get into the canal. Because of the drought, there have been restrictions to the point where they're taking half the traffic they did 2 years ago. But there's a waiting list. They allow cruise ships and passenger ships priority because we are impatient, unlike those boxes full of Christmas toys. Oops, too late for Christmas. But this is the look in the Colon side. Same thing, the breakwaters in the Panama City Pacific side. So I'm just going to show you going in and out and through the locks. Colon and Panama have, you see all the cranes, there's a lot of transshipments. The ship will come and drop some boxes and they'll pick them up and other ships will come. So both ports have very extensive infrastructure for that. Here's a ship that couldn't wait any longer. And here's the Gatun locks coming through here, and that's the construction of the new set of locks. Will be coming out that way. But so here's the old lock from 1914 when it opened up, and we'll be going right through it with the funicular kind of cable trains. They call them the mules that will tie onto the lines of the ship and take it through the lock at a tension so that it doesn't rub the sides or anything. Now, these were originally built by the GE Corporation as one of their first major projects, and they were operating for 60-some years, and then they let out another tender. Now, these mules have 750 kilowatt engines in them, electrical. They're built by Mitsubishi. And then they come up to the power station and these transfer buildings that are on side of each lock, and then you come into the lock, and then the gates will close, and then they'll rise. This is the Panamax sides. These older locks had been the measure of ships that could come through here for many years. There's also Suez Max, which are too big for Panama, but just the right size for the Suez Canal. And now you have what they call Cape Max or post-Cape Max, or ones that have to go around all of Cape Hope or Cape Horn, and they can never go through a canal. But that's just because the ships just keep getting bigger and bigger. And so again, some 90% of world global commerce goes by ships through places like this. And that's where the ships are sort of almost comically built so they can just fit in here. But it sure doesn't look too comfortable if you have a top cabin on that one in a rolling sea. And as we go through, after the first set of locks, then into the lake, you'll see they're constantly dredging. So again, we're coming in Panama City, Miraflores, Gatun, Culebra cuts about there, then the lake, and then out to the sea. You can see how green it is because the canal zone had no agriculture and no villages. Nobody was supposed to be there. It was a security zone. So it ended up being the last part of a rainforest preserve right in the middle of Panama. On either side of it, it's all towns, villages, highways, deforested. But this is an island in Gatun, right where we'll go by, called Barro Colorado, which has old growth rainforest. So there's actually an excursion over to look at that. But it's the home of the Tropical Research Institute of the Smithsonian, mostly for biology and geology and things. But just on that island, right where we'll go by, they have ocelot, jaguar, and different kinds of monkeys, capuchin, howler monkeys, this one. So right in the middle of the canal, there's this nature preserve. And the animals must look and sort of say, where is everybody going? Why are all these ships coming past our line? Well, this is one of the Panamanian pilots who, by law, must command the ship. In other harbors, the pilot comes on as an advisor, but in this case, the Panamanian authorities actually give what's called give the con. They direct the ship through it because they know just how to do it. So there's no room for error. There's also electronic control, and they have mobile communication, so it's all fairly high tech. By the way, you can watch each lock as we go through it on a webcam that is, what's its name? Panama-canal.com. Panama-canal.com. So you can actually go out on your balcony and wave to yourself and see yourself on the webcam. In case you have, you're getting tired of the long, hot trip through it. Anyway, this is the Miraflores locks with the double gate. For safety, they put at the upside of the locks, lake side of it, a double gate in case one either leaked or failed. And again, these have been working since 1914, but above all, you can see they're all full of rivets. It's kind of wrought iron with riveting. And it's withstood the traffic. Now over 1 million ships have come through the canal. But they keep getting bigger and sort of looming over the whole thing. And this is where the canal authority said that we just have to get a build bigger locks for the bigger ships. Otherwise, we'll miss the new traffic. That's, of course, where the big money is. Once we're in through the locks, we're on the lake, and there's about 4 hours of cruising in the Gatun Lake. This used to all be river valley and swamps and such. Now it's this crystalline freshwater lake. And so some of it you feel like you're going through mysterious places, not so far from Panama City, though. And there's some shortcuts. This one is what's that called? The Culebra shortcut or something, so that a small ship can go there and not have to get out of the main channel. So this is our day. We'll be there around lunchtime through the canal. Through the lake area, Gatun Lake. This is fed by a series of reservoirs, like this is a new one, Alajuela, up higher in the mountains. And so the key element to keep this going is to get enough water from the other lands nearby. This is halfway again in Gatun Lake. We will go past Gamboa, where they have the maintenance section of the canal with these great cranes to service the locks and or do the dredging. This happens to be an Italian-built crane that was a war prize in World War II, was brought over to be the main service crane since then. Though now it's a steam engine, though, so now it's just a relic. You'll see this on the ship. We'll also pass other dams and things so you can sort of understand how the water is coming down and moderated by flood control and filling for the lake. In Miraflores, they have the last of the rowboat line handlers. So it will come out with a line on a bigger line and hand it to the ship. So that's probably the more tricky job in the whole canal, because you have to go out in front of these giant ships coming at you. This is the Miraflores lock. Again, we'll be going through here, and that's a three-stage lock. You can see up there, that's the new lock, or the Neo-Panamax is what they call it. But again, in Miraflores, you see the construction of the riveted iron, and this is called a gate lock. So the pressure of the water actually holds it tight and has a seal in it so that it drips very little. They have to take them out and check everything now and then, but the originals are still working. So it's rare to find something that is working so well after 100 years. And as you go out at the Miraflores, as we will go in this way in the morning, you can see this building, which was the former American military headquarters and the Canal Authority's offices. Panama City rising over the ridge there. But now they've turned it into a university. They call it the City of Knowledge. So it's been turned to public education. And then as you go out either end of the canal, you go through a couple of bridges. This is the Centenary Bridge with the the Pan American Highway on it into Panama City. And this is again the entrance into the canal on the Panama City side. So we'll see this in the morning, though. I think somebody's private yacht already went through. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the new locks, which are called the Cocoli locks here, and then the new Agua Clara locks up there. So essentially, they built new locks and widened some of the channels so that the ever larger ships could come through, what they call post-Panamax, the widening and such. So this started in 2005 and was opened finally 2017. And what it means is they just built larger. The initial construction just had to build dams to be able to dig through and then rise the locks and particularly the valves and the water systems. So we used to go through and watch this fantastic construction like we were watching the original one. But here's an example of the locks that have been designed, which are not gate locks. This is actually a sliding lock. It was made in Italy near Genova and brought over on a sea barge like this and then installed. So these are much bigger than the other ones. But the difference for the new set is that they have reservoirs that'll pool the water. On the old locks, it took some estimated 51 million gallons to send one ship through. What they did on the new design is that the water dropping from one lock would go into the reservoir and go into the next one, so they would recycle 60% or more of the water and not run out of water, hopefully. But the size of it is quite remarkable, just that the old locks had these restrictions, 32 meters wide, and now it's 48, 55 meters deep versus 33. So this meant that the size of the ships could increase logarithmically, and the value of the cargo being transmitted are also more valuable for the new mega ships. So this is in operation. We could see when we go on the way to the Caribbean Atlantic side, Agua Clara, that's the name of this lock going to the north. And they built an observation point over that like they have in Miraflores, where we'll go. And so you go out the new lock, and then you go under the new Bridge of the Americas, they call it, which was completed 2019 by a Chinese construction company. It's said to be the highest bridge over a seaway in the world. But that's necessary because you can see the size of these ships are just bursting with holiday cheer, I'd say. And here's the slide lock, comes just in and out. It never swings. It just is pulled into place, and the seals hold it, and they can drop the water or fill the water. So here it is coming in, closed behind a ship. I think this is the Barbie ship. Yeah, it's pink. It's full of Barbie dolls, the whole ship. And here are the reservoirs for recycling the water. So hopefully this was going to make it a much more efficient operation, and it would not need further damming or waterworks to make it functional. So this is the way into to the Pacific. We'll actually come out of here in the old lock, and you'll see the other ships go on the big, the Neo-Panamax ship. So this is their big control center. Well, you can imagine if you're a local indigenous person, and this has been your land for thousands of years, and you go out for a paddle and you see what's coming here. So this is the great problem of the current time, is because there's been a persistent drought all through Colombia, Panama, and Central America for now a few years, and the water levels have dropped so much. They've maintained the Gatun Lake system, but the upland, this is what's going on. They're running out of water. So they've restricted the amount of shipping to about half of what it was. And for instance, they would have up to 36 major ships a day a number of years ago. Now it's down to 32. November it was 25, and this coming February they're planning to only have 18 ships pass because that's the dry season, and they literally cannot fill the locks. And so the function of the climate change is the real problem, because Panama had a lot of rainforest jungle, and most of the reservoirs are right up in there. There's another one over there, but the deforestation has been so extensive, partly because they extended the Pan American Highway into there. Now it's been chopped up, and now mining companies have come in, and development, and people building houses, and it's become a semi-urban country almost. And so last year there were a lot of protests in Panama City that they don't want to sell Panama to particularly mining and timber interests, because they've taken on approximately $8 billion in debt for the bonds to build the new locks. And now they can't operate them because they don't have enough money. And in business, that means you don't have your income back. So there have been a lot of protests to try to stop the climate change if they possibly can, especially the deforestation, which is directly related to the water supply. The other problem Panama has is all the immigrants coming from around the world into South America and then hiking across Panama to get into the stampede going to the northern borders. And so this is another social problem, because Panama doesn't have room for tens of hundreds of thousands, actually, of immigrants. They shuffle them up to Mexico usually. And so this is the crisis of Panama. It's the same with the rest of the world. How do we have a better future if we have these kind of serious problems? But meanwhile, we'll land in a very happy place. Where we're going at Fuente Amador. They have now a hotel and restaurants, and this is right walking distance off of the ship. Otherwise, Panama City is about 5 miles into the city. But you can just walk off the ship and have a crazy mango. So Panama, whatever, maybe it has problems, it's still a pretty happy place. And this is, again, where we will be landing, right near here, and see all the ships out there. And so if you want to pick up a condo, there's a few in the neighborhood there for sale. I thought I'd like to live in Panama, having been here numerous times. But as a sailor, I thought I'd get a boat. So there's a lot of boats that are brought here and then for sale. And so I was shopping around. I found one that was really inexpensive. And then I found another one where the price was really down to the bottom. And so I decided to pass on it because I'm busy doing other things, let's say. But anyway, this is Panama City, of course, and right where we're landing, there's this new, what they call the Bio Museum, which is a building designed by the architect Frank Gehry as his sort of tissue in the wind kind of special engineering. And this is the Natural History Museum for Panama, with a lot of exhibits and classrooms and things like this. And you can walk from the ship to this. If it's open on Christmas, I don't think so, but But it's quite a remarkable building. It doesn't really have an inside or an outside. It's just shelter, shade, and then you can walk through it because it's open air. So you sort of wish the people of Panama well. And I'm going to give you a last quote of John Sullivan, who was the great engineer, designer of the Panama Canal. And he said, "To the young engineers who must carry on our work, we are all children picking up pebbles from the shore of a boundless ocean." And so I hope the future of Panama will be La vida bella, the lovely life. That, you know, a lot of Panamanians have become prosperous because of this, so the whole nation has become prosperous in a way. I'll leave you with the anagram, a man, a plan, a canal, Panama. And the motto of the canal, El Canal no se detiene, which is the canal never stops. And with that, I'll leave you one last Panamanian proverb. The leafiest tree does not always have the juiciest fruit. Or half an orange tastes just as good as a whole one. Or I like this one. Speak whenever you must, hush whenever you can. Thank you for being here, and have a great trip in Panama. Thank you.